Chapter 20 of the pleasant plan they carried out to persuade Don Quixote not to continue his penance. When the unfortunate Dorothea had finished her story, she remained silent, her face flushed with sorrow, and as the priest was about to comfort her, Cardenio took her by the hand and said, "Lady, thou art the beautiful Dorothea, daughter unto rich Cleonardo." Dorothea was amazed when she heard her father's name, spoken by a person of such wretched appearance as Cardenio, and answered, "Who art thou, friend, that knowest so well my father's name? For unless I am mistaken, I did not once name him throughout all my story." "I am," said Cardenio, "the unlucky one to whom Lucinda was betrothed, and I too had thought that I was without hope of comfort. But now I hear that Lucinda will not marry Fernando, because she is mine, and Fernando cannot marry Lucinda, because he is yours. It seems to me that there is yet some consolation for both of us, and I vow, on the faith of a gentleman, not to forsake you until I see you in the possession of Don Fernando." The curate now told them both the nature of his errand, and begged that they would join him in his travels, and stay as long as they pleased at his village. By this time they heard the voice of Sancho Panza, who, not finding them where he had left them, was calling out as loudly as he might. They went to meet him, and asked for Don Quixote. Sancho told them that he had found him almost naked to his shirt, lean and yellow, half dead with hunger, and sighing for the lady Dulcinea, and although he had told him that she commanded him to journey to Toboso, yet he declared that he had made up his mind not to appear before her until he had done feats worthy of her great beauty. The curate now returned and told Dorothea of their plan, and she at once offered to act the part of the distressed damsel, for she had a lady's dress in the bundle which she carried. "The sooner, then, we set about our work, the better," said the barber. Dorothea retired to put on a robe of a fine rich woolen cloth, a short mantle of another green stuff, and a collar and many rich jewels which she took from a little casket. With these things she adorned herself so gorgeously that she appeared to be a princess at least. When Sancho saw her, he was amazed, and asked the curate with great eagerness to tell him who the lady was, and what she was doing in these out-of-the-way places. "This beautiful lady, brother Sancho," replied the curate, "is the heiress and direct line of the mighty kingdom of Micomicon, who has come in search of thy master to ask of him a boon, which is to avenge her of a wrong done by a wicked giant, and owing to the great fame of thy master, which has spread through all lands, this beautiful princess has come to find him out." "A happy searcher and a happy finding," cried Sancho. "My master shall soon slay the great lubber of a giant, unless he turns out to be a phantom, for he has no power over those things. And when this is done, my lord shall marry the princess, whose name, by the by, you have not yet told me, and by this means shall he become an emperor, and have islands to give away." "Her name," replied the curate, "is the Princess Micomicona, and as to your master's marriage, I will do what I can to help." Sancho was quite satisfied with these answers, and when Dorothea had mounted the mule, he guided them towards the spot where Don Quixote was to be found. And as they went along, the barber told Sancho he must in no way pretend to know who he was, for if he did, Don Quixote would never leave the mountains, and would never become an emperor. The curate and Cardenio remained behind, promising to join them again on the first opportunity. Having travelled about 3/4 of a league, they found Don Quixote clothed, though still unarmed, sitting amidst the rocks. No sooner did Sancho tell Dorothea that this was his master, than she whipped up her palfrey, closely followed by the well-bearded barber, who jumped from his mule and ran to help his lady alight. Quickly dismounting, she threw herself on her knees before Don Quixote, and refusing his efforts to raise her, spoke as follows: "Never will I rise from this position, most valiant and invincible knight. until you grant me a boon which will not only add to your honor and renown, but also assist the most injured and unfortunate damsel that ever the sun beheld. And if the valor of your mighty arm be equal to what I have heard of your immortal fame, you can indeed render aid to a miserable being who comes from a far distant land to seek your help."
"Beauteous lady," replied Don Quixote, "I will not answer one word, nor hear a jot of your affairs, until you rise from the ground."
"I will not rise, my lord," answered the unfortunate maiden, "until I have obtained from you the boon I beg."
"Dear lady," replied Don Quixote, "it is granted, so that it be not anything that touches my duty to my king, my country, or the chosen queen of my heart."
"Your kindness shall in no way affect them," replied Dorothea. At this moment Sancho came up and whispered softly in his master's ear, "Sir, you may very well grant the request she asketh, for it is a mere nothing. It is only to kill a monstrous giant, and she that demands it is the Princess Micomicona, queen of the great kingdom of Micomicon in Ethiopia."
"Let her be what she will," said Don Quixote. "I will do my duty towards her."
And then, turning to the damsel, he said,
"Rise, most beautiful lady, for I grant you any boon you shall please to ask of me."
"Why then," said Dorothea, "what I ask of you is that you will at once come away with me to the place where I shall guide you, and that you promise me not to undertake any new adventure until you have revenged me on a traitor who has driven me out of my kingdom."
"I grant your request," said Don Quixote, "and therefore, lady, you may cast away from this day forward all the melancholy that troubles you, for this mighty arm shall restore you to your kingdom."
The distressed damsel strove with much ado to kiss his hand, but Don Quixote, who was a most courteous knight, would not permit it, and, making her arise, treated her with the greatest respect. He now commanded Sancho to saddle Rocinante and help him to arm himself, and this done, the knight was ready to depart. The barber, who had been kneeling all the while, had great difficulty to stop laughing aloud at all this, and his beard was in danger of falling off. He was glad to get up and help his lady to mount the mule, and when Don Quixote was mounted, and the barber himself had got upon his beast, they were ready to start. As for Sancho, who trudged along on foot, he could not help grieving for the loss of his Dapple. But he bore it all with patience, for now he saw his master on the way to marry a princess, and so become at least king of Micomicon. Visions tumbled one over the other inside the head of the honest squire. Sancho decked in fine robes, Sancho feasting on honeyed ham, Sancho drinking from marble fountains, Sancho basking in the love of his adoring vassals. While this was going on, the curate and Cardenio had not been idle, for the curate was a cunning plotter and had hit on a bright idea. He took from his pocket a pair of scissors and cut off Cardenio's rugged beard and trimmed his hair very cleverly. And when he had thrown his riding cloak over Cardenio's shoulders, he was so unlike what he was before that he would not have known himself in a looking-glass. This finished, they went out to meet Don Quixote and the others. When they came towards them, the curate looked earnestly at the knight for some time, and then ran towards him with open arms, saying, "In a good hour is this meeting, my worthy countryman, the mirror of knighthood, Don Quixote of the Mancha, the champion of the distressed." Don Quixote did not at first know him, but when he remembered the curate, he wanted to alight, saying, "It is not seemly, reverend sir, that I should ride whilst you travel on foot." But the curate would not allow him to dismount and give him his horse, but suggested that he might ride behind the lady's squire on his mule. "I did not think of that, good master curate," said Don Quixote, "but I know my lady the princess will, for my sake, order her squire to lend you the use of his saddle." "That I will," said the princess, "and I know my squire is the last man to grudge a share of his beast to this reverend father."
"That is most certain," said the barber, and got off his steed at once. The curate now mounted, but the misfortune was that when the barber tried to get up behind, the mule, which was a hired one, lifted up her legs and kicked out with such fury that she knocked Mr. Nicholas to the ground, and as he rolled over, his beard fell off and lay upon the earth. Don Quixote, seeing that huge mass of beard torn from the jaw without blood, and lying at a distance from the squire's face, said, "This, I vow, is one of the greatest miracles I ever saw in my life. The beard is taken off as clean by the heel of the mule as if it had been done by the hand of a barber." The curate, seeing the risk they ran of their plan being found out, came to where Master Nicholas was lying, and with one jerk clapped it on again, muttering as he did so some Latin words, which he said were a charm for fixing on beards. By this means, to Don Quixote's amazement, the squire was cured again, and he asked the curate to tell him this charm, which he said, since it could heal a wound of this kind, must be good for even more dangerous injuries. The curate agreed to tell him the secret some other day, and having mounted the mule, the party rode slowly away towards the inn.
Chapter 21 of the Journey to the Inn. The curate rode first on the mule, and with him rode Don Quixote and the princess. The others, Cardenio, the barber, and Sancho Panza, followed on foot. As they rode, Don Quixote said to the damsel, "Madam, let me entreat your highness to lead the way that most pleaseth you." Before she could answer, the curate said, "Towards what kingdoms would you travel? Are you for your native land of Micomicon?" She, who knew very well what to answer, being no babe, replied, "Yes, sir, my way lies towards that kingdom." "If it be so," said the curate, "you must pass through the village where I dwell, and from thence your ladyship must take the road to Cartagena, where you may embark. And if you have a prosperous journey, you may come within the space of 9 years to the lake Miolides, which stands on this side of your highness's kingdom, some 100 days' journey or more." "You are mistaken, good sir," said she, "for it is not yet fully 2 years since I left there, and though I never had fair weather, I have arrived in time to see what I so longed for, the presence of the renowned Don Quixote of the Mancha, whose glory was known to me as soon as my foot touched the shores of Spain."
"No more," cried Don Quixote. "I cannot abide to hear myself praised, for I am a sworn enemy to flattery. And though I know what you speak is but truth, yet it offends mine ears. And I can tell you this at least, that whether I have valor or not, I will use it in your service, even to the loss of my life. But let me know, Master Curate, what has brought you here?" "You must know, then," replied the curate, "that Master Nicholas, the barber, and myself travelled towards Seville to recover certain sums of money which a kinsman of mine in the Indies has sent me. And passing yesterday through this way, we were set upon by 4 robbers who took everything that we had. And it is said about here that those who robbed us were certain galley slaves, who they say were set at liberty almost on this very spot, by a man so valiant that in spite of the guard he released them all. And doubtless he must be out of his wits, or else he must be as great a knave as they, to loose the wolf among the sheep, and rebel against his king by taking from the galleys their lawful prey."
Sancho had told the curate of the adventure with the galley slaves, and the curate spoke of it to see what Don Quixote would say. The knight, however, durst not confess his part in the adventure, but rode on, changing colour at every word the curate spoke. When the curate had finished, Sancho burst out, "By my father, Master Curate, he that did that deed was my master, and that not for want of warning, for I told him beforehand that it was a sin to deliver them, and that they were great rogues who had been sent to the galleys to punish them for their crimes."
"You bottlehead," replied Don Quixote, "it is not the duty of knights errant to examine whether the afflicted, enslaved, and oppressed, whom they meet by the way, are in sorrow for their own default. They must relieve them because they are needy and in distress, looking at their sorrow and not at their crimes. And if any but the holy master curate shall find fault with me on this account, I will tell him that he knows naught of knighthood, and that he lies in his throat, and this I will make him know by the power of my sword."
Dorothea, who was discreet enough to see they were carrying the jest too far, now said, "Remember, Sir Knight, the boon you promised me, never to engage in any other adventure, be it ever so urgent, until you have seen me righted. And had Master Curate known that it was the mighty arm of Don Quixote that freed the galley slaves, I feel sure he would have bit his tongue, through ere he spoke words which might cause you anger."
"That I dare swear," said the curate. "Madam," replied Don Quixote, "I will hold my peace and keep my anger to myself, and will ride on peaceably and quietly until I have done the thing I promised. Tell me, therefore, without delay, what are your troubles, and on whom am I to take revenge?"
To this Dorothea replied, "Willingly will I do what you ask, so you will give me your attention." At this Cardenio and the barber drew near to hear the witty Dorothea tell her tale, and Sancho, who was as much deceived as his master, was the most eager of all to listen. She, after settling herself in her saddle, began with a lively air to speak as follows. "In the first place, I would have you know, gentlemen, that my name is—" Here she stopped a moment, for she had forgotten what name the curate had given her. He, seeing her trouble, said quickly, "It is no wonder, great lady, that you hesitate to tell your misfortunes. Great sufferers often lose their memory, so that they even forget their own names, as seems to have happened to your ladyship, who has forgotten that she is called the Princess Micomicona, heiress of the great kingdom of Micomicon." "True," said the damsel, "but let me proceed. The king, my father, was called Tenacrio the Sage, and was learned in the magic art. By this he discovered that my mother, the Queen Zaramilla, would die before him, and that I should soon afterwards be left an orphan. This did not trouble him so much as the knowledge that a certain giant called Panda Filando of the Sour Face, lord of the great island near our border, when he should hear that I was an orphan, would pass over with a mighty force into my kingdom and take it from me. My father warned me that when this came to pass, I should not stay to defend myself, and so cause the slaughter of my people, but should at once set out for Spain, where I should meet with a knight whose fame would then extend through all the kingdom. His name, he said, should be Don Quixote, and he would be tall of stature, have a withered face, and on his right side, a little under his left shoulder, he should have a tawny spot with certain hairs like bristles." On hearing this, Don Quixote said, "Hold my horse, son Sancho, and help me to strip, for I would know if I am the knight of whom the sage king spoke." "There is no need," said Sancho, "for I know that your worship has such a mark near your backbone." "It is enough," said Dorothea, "for among friends we must not be too particular, and whether it is on your shoulder or your backbone is of no importance, and indeed no sooner did I land in Osuna than I heard of Don Quixote's fame, and felt sure that he was the man."
"But how did you land in Osuna, madame?" asked Don Quixote, "seeing that it is not a sea town." "Sir," said the curate, "the princess would say that she landed at Malaga, and that Osuna was the first place wherein she heard tidings of your worship."
"That is so," said Dorothea. "And now nothing remains but to guide you to Pandafilando of the Sour Face, that I may see you slay him, and once again enter into my kingdom. For all must succeed as the wise Tenacrio, my father, has foretold, and if the night of the prophecy, when he has killed the giant, so desires, then it will be my lot to become his wife, and he will at once possess both me and my kingdom."
"What thinkest thou of this, friend Sancho? Did I not tell thee this would come about? Here we have a kingdom to command and a queen to marry."
When Sancho heard all this, he jumped for joy, and running to Dorothea, stopped her mule, and asking her very humbly to give him her hand to kiss, he kneeled down as a sign that he accepted her as his queen and lady. All around could scarcely hide their laughter at the knight's madness and the squire's simplicity, and when Dorothea promised Sancho to make him a great lord, and Sancho gave her thanks, it roused their mirth anew. "Madam," continued Don Quixote, who appeared to be full of thought, "I repeat all I have said, and make my vow anew, and when I have cut off the head of Pandafilando, I will put you in peaceable possession of your kingdom. But since my memory and will are captive to another, it is not possible for me to marry." So disgusted was Sancho with what he heard that he cried out in a great rage, "Surely, Sir Don Quixote, your worship is not in your right senses. Is it possible your worship can refuse to marry a princess like this? A poor chance have I of getting a countship if your worship goes on like this, searching for mushrooms at the bottom of the sea. Is my lady Dulcinea more beautiful? She cannot hold a candle to her. Marry at once, and when you are king, make me a governor." Don Quixote, who heard such evil things spoken of his lady Dulcinea, could not bear them any longer, and therefore, lifting up his lance, without speaking a word to Sancho, gave him 2 blows that brought him to the earth. And if Dorothea had not called to the knight to spare him, without doubt he would have taken his squire's life. "Think you, miserable villain," cried Don Quixote, "that it is to be all sinning on thy side and pardoning on mine? Say, scoffer with the viper's tongue, who dost thou think hath gained this kingdom, and cut off the head of this giant, and made thee marquis? For all this I take to be a thing as good as completed, unless it be the worth and valour of Dulcinea using my arm as her instrument. She fights in my person, and I live and breathe in her. From her I hold my life and being. O villain, how ungrateful art thou that seest thyself raised from the dust of the earth to be a nobleman, and speakest evil of her who gives thee such honours." Sancho was not too much hurt to hear what his master said. He jumped up nimbly and ran behind Dorothea's palfrey, and from there said to his master, "Tell me, your worship, if you are not going to marry this great princess, how this kingdom will become yours, and how you can do me any favours. Pray, marry this queen now we have her here. I say nothing against Lady Dulcinea's beauty, for I have never seen her." "How, thou wicked traitor, thou hast not seen her?" cried Don Quixote. "Didst thou not but now bring me a message from her?" "I mean," replied Sancho, "not seen her for long enough to judge of her beauty, though from what I did see, she appeared to be very lovely." "Ah," said Don Quixote, "then I do excuse thee, but have a care what thou sayest, for remember, the pitcher may go once too often to the well." "No more of this," said Dorothea. "Run, Sancho, kiss your master's hand, and ask his pardon. Henceforth speak no evil of the lady Dulcinea, and trust that fortune may find you an estate where you may live like a prince." Sancho went up, hanging his head, and asked his lord's hand, which he gave him with a grave air, and, after he had kissed it, the knight gave him his blessing, and no more was said about it. While this was passing, they saw, coming along the road on which they were, a man riding upon an ass, and when he drew near he seemed to be a gipsy. But Sancho Panza, whenever he met with any asses, followed them with his eyes and his heart, and he had hardly caught sight of the man when he knew him to be the escaped robber Gines of Pasamonte, and the ass to be none other than his beloved Dapple. Gines had disguised himself as a gipsy, but Sancho knew him and called out in a loud voice, "Ah, thief Gines, give up my jewel. Let go my life, give up mine ass, give up the comfort of my home. Fly, scoundrel, begone, thief, give back what is none of thine." He need not have used so many words, for Gines leaped off at the first and raced away from them all as fast as his legs could carry him. Sancho then ran up to Dapple, and embracing him cried, "How hast thou been cared for, my darling and treasure, Dapple of mine eyes, my sweet companion?" With this he stroked and kissed him as if he had been a human being, but the ass held his peace and allowed Sancho to kiss and cherish him without answering a word. Chapter 22. The story Sancho Panza told his master of his visit to the lady Dulcinea. When the rest came up, they all congratulated Sancho on finding his ass, and Don Quixote promised that he would still give him the 3 ass colts, for which Sancho thanked him heartily. While the knight and his squire rode on ahead, the curate said to Cardenio, "Is it not marvellous to see the strange way in which this good gentleman believes all these inventions, and this only because they wear the style and fashion of the follies he is so fond of reading?" "It is so," said Cardenio, "and indeed if he were a character in a storybook, no one would believe in him." "There is another thing too," said the curate, "that apart from his folly about knighthood, no one would esteem him to be other than a man of excellent judgment." Don Quixote at the same time was saying to Sancho, "Friend Sancho, let us bury all injuries, and tell me when, how, and where didst thou find Dulcinea? What was she doing? What saidst thou to her? What answer made she? How did she look when she read my letter? Who copied it for thee? Tell me all, without adding to it or lying, for I would know everything." "Master," replied Sancho, "if I must speak the truth, nobody copied out the letter, for I carried no letter at all." "Thou sayest true," said Don Quixote, "for I found the pocket-book, wherein it was written, 2 days after thy departure, and I did expect that thou wouldst return for it." "I had done so," said Sancho, "if I had not carried it in my memory when you read it to me, so that I could say it to a parish clerk, who copied it out of my head, word for word, so exactly that he said that in all the days of his life he had never read such a pretty letter." "And hast thou it still by heart, Sancho?" asked Don Quixote. "No, sir, for after I gave it, seeing that it was to be of no more use, I let myself forget it. If I remember, it began, 'Scrubby Queen, Sovereign Lady,' and the ending, 'Yours till death, the Knight of the Rueful Countenance.' But between these things I put in 300 hearts and loves and dear eyes." "All this I like to hear, therefore say on," said Don Quixote. "Thou didst arrive, and what was the Queen of Beauty doing then? I dare say thou foundest her threading pearls, or embroidering some curious device with golden threads for this her captive knight." "No, that I did not," said Sancho, "but winnowing 2 bushels of wheat in the yard of her house." "Why then," said Don Quixote, "thou mayest reckon that each grain of wheat was a pearl, seeing that they were touched by her hands. But tell me, when thou didst deliver my letter, did she kiss it? Did she use any ceremony worthy of such a letter? Or what did she?" "When I went to give it to her," said Sancho, "she was all in a bustle with a good lot of wheat in her sieve, and said to me, 'Lay down that letter there on the sack, for I cannot read it until I have winnowed all that is here.'" "O discreet lady," said Don Quixote, "she must have done that, so that she might read and enjoy it at leisure. Go on then, Sancho, and tell all she said about me, and what thou saidst to her." "She asked me nothing," replied the squire, "but I told her the state which I left you in for her sake, doing penance all naked from the girdle up, among these rocks like a brute beast, and I told her how you slept on the ground, and never combed your beard, but spent your time weeping and cursing your fortune." "There thou saidst ill," said Don Quixote, "for I do not curse my fortune, but rather bless it, seeing that it hath made me worthy to merit the love of so beautiful a lady as Dulcinea of Toboso. But tell me, after she had sifted her corn and sent it to the mill, did she then read my letter?" "The letter," replied Sancho, "she did never read, for she said she could neither read nor write, and therefore she tore it into small pieces, and would allow no one to read it, lest the whole village might know her secrets. Lastly, she told me that I was to say to your worship that she kissed your hands, and that she had a greater desire to see you than to write to you. Therefore she begged, as you loved her, that you should quit these bushes and brambles, and leave off these mad pranks, and set out for Toboso, for she had a great longing to see your worship. She laughed a good deal when I told her they called your worship the Knight of the Rueful Countenance. I asked her whether the beaten Biscayan came there. She said yes, and that he was a very good fellow. I asked also after the galley slaves, but she told me that she had seen none of them as yet."
"All goes well, then," said Don Quixote. "But tell me, what jewel did she bestow on thee at thy departure for reward of the tidings thou hadst brought? For it is a usual and ancient custom among knights errant and their ladies to give to their squires, damsels, or dwarfs who bring good tidings some rich jewel as a reward for their welcome news."
"It may well be," replied Sancho, "and I think it was a most excellent custom, but I doubt if it exists nowadays, for it would seem to be the manner of our age only to give a piece of bread and cheese, for this was all that my lady Dulcinea bestowed on me when I took my leave, and, by the way, the cheese was made of sheep's milk."
"She is marvellous liberal," said the knight, "and if she gave thee not a jewel of gold, it was doubtless because she had none then about her. But that will be put right some day. Knowest thou, Sancho, at what I am astonished? It is at thy sudden return, for it seems to me thou wast gone, and hast come back again in the air, for thou hast been away but a little more than 3 days, although Toboso is more than 30 leagues from hence. Therefore I do believe that the wise enchanter, who takes care of my affairs and is my friend, must have helped thee to travel without thy being aware of it, for there are sages that take up a knight-errant sleeping in his bed, and without knowing how, or in what manner, he awakes the next day more than 1,000 leagues from the place where he fell asleep. For otherwise knights-errant could not help one another in perils as they do now. For it may be that one is fighting in the mountains of Armenia with some dragon or fierce serpent, and is at the point of death, and just when he least expects it, he sees on a cloud, or in a chariot of fire, some other knight, his friend, who a little before was in England, who helps him and delivers him from danger. And all this is done by the craft and wisdom of those sage enchanters who take care of valorous knights. But, leaving all this apart, what dost thou think I should do about my lady's commands to go and see her?"
"Tell me, your good worship," replied Sancho. "Do you intend to journey to Toboso and lose so rich and noble a prize as this princess? Peace. Take my advice and marry her in the first village that hath a parish priest. Or let the curate do it, for he is here. And remember the old saying, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush."
"Look you, Sancho," said his master, "if you counsel me to marry, to the end that I may be king when I have slain the giant and be able to give you an island, know that I can do that without marrying, for I will make it a condition that upon conquering this monster they shall give me a portion of the kingdom, although I marry not the princess, and this I will bestow upon thee."
"Let it be so then," said Sancho. "And trouble not your mind, I pray you, to go and see the lady Dulcinea at this moment, but go away and kill the giant, and let us finish off this job, for I believe it will prove of great honour and greater profit."
"I believe, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "that thou art in the right, and I will follow thy advice in going first with the princess, rather than visiting Dulcinea."
At this moment Master Nicholas the barber called out to them to stay a while, for they wished to halt and drink at a small spring hard by. Don Quixote stopped, to Sancho's very great content, as he was already tired of telling so many lies, and feared that his master would entrap him in his own words. For although he knew that Dulcinea was a peasant lass of Toboso, yet he had never seen her in all his life. Chapter 23. What happened during their further journey towards the inn. They all dismounted at the spring, and by this time Cardenio had dressed himself in the boy's clothes that Dorothea had worn, which, though by no means good, were better than those he cast off. The curate had brought some scanty provisions from the inn, and they sat down near the spring to satisfy, as well they could, the hunger they all felt. Whilst they took their ease, a young lad passed by, who looked very earnestly at all those who sat round the spring, and after a moment ran up to Don Quixote, and embracing his legs, burst into tears, crying, "Ah, my lord, do not you know me? Look well upon me. I am the boy Andrew, whom you unloosed from the oak tree to which I was tied." Don Quixote knew him at once, and taking him by the hand, turned to those who were present and said, "That you may see how important it is to have knights-errant in the world, to set right the wrongs and injuries which are done by insolent and wicked men, you must know that a few days ago, as I rode through a wood, I heard piteous screams and cries as of some person in sore distress. I hastened instantly to the place, and there I found tied to an oak this boy whom you see here. And I am glad that he is here, because if I shall not say the truth, he may check me. He was tied to an oak tree, stark naked from the waist upward, and a certain clown, whom I afterwards learned to be his master, was beating him with a horse's bridle. As soon as I saw him, I asked the master the reason of his cruelty. The farmer replied that he was beating him because he was his servant, and that he had been guilty of carelessness due rather to knavery than stupidity. At which the lad said, 'Sir, he beats me only because I ask him for my wages.' The farmer answered with many excuses, which I heard but did not believe. I made him at once untie the boy, and forced him to swear me an oath that he would take him home with him and pay him every real upon the nail. Is not all this true, son Andrew? Answer, nor hesitate in anything. Tell these gentlemen what passed, that they may learn how necessary it is to have knights-errant up and down the highways."
"All that your worship says is very true," replied the lad, "but the end of the business was very contrary to what you imagine."
"How contrary?" asked Don Quixote. "Did not the clown pay thee, then?"
"He not only did not pay me," answered the boy, "but as soon as you had passed out of the wood, and we were alone again, he tied me to the same tree and gave me afresh so many blows that I had like to be flayed alive, and at each blow he uttered some jest to make a mock of your lordship, and if I had not felt so much pain, I could have found it in my heart to have laughed very merrily. In fact, he left me in such a wretched plight that I have been in hospital ever since. And you are at fault in all this, for if you had ridden on your way, and not come meddling in other folks' affairs, perhaps my master would have contented himself with giving me a dozen blows or so, and would presently have let me loose and paid me my wages. But because you abused him so harshly, his anger was aroused, and as he could not revenge himself on you, as soon as he was alone, he let loose the storm of his wrath upon me, in such a manner that I fear I shall never be a man again as long as I live."
"The mischief was," said Don Quixote, "in my going away, for I should not have departed until I had seen thee paid. For I might well have known that no churl will keep his word if he finds that it does not suit him to keep it. But yet, Andrew, thou dost remember how I swore that if he paid thee not, I would return and seek him out, and find him, though he should hide himself in the belly of a whale."
"That is true," replied Andrew, "but it is all of no use."
"Thou shalt see whether it is of use or no presently," said Don Quixote.
And so saying, he got up hastily and commanded Sancho to bridle Rocinante, who was feeding whilst they did eat. Dorothea asked him what it was he meant to do. He answered that he meant to go in search of the farmer and punish him for his bad conduct and make him pay Andrew to the last farthing, in spite of all the churls in the world. To which she answered, entreating him to remember that he could not deal with any other adventure according to his promise until he had finished hers, and as he knew this better than anyone else, he must restrain his anger until he returned from her kingdom.
"That is true," answered Don Quixote, "and Andrew must have patience until my return, for I once more vow and promise anew never to rest until he be satisfied and paid."
"I do not believe these vows," said Andrew. "I would rather just now have as much money as would help me on my way to Seville than all the revenge in the world. Give me something to eat, and let me go, and may all knights errant be as erring to themselves as they have been with me."
Sancho took out of his bag a piece of bread and cheese, and giving it to the lad, said, "Take it, brother Andrew, for each of us has a share in your misfortune."
"What share have you in it?"
asked Andrew. "This piece of bread and cheese which I give thee," said Sancho, "for no one knows whether I shall have need of it again or not. For you must know, my friend, that we squires to knights-errants suffer great hunger and ill luck, and many things which are better felt than told." Andrew laid hold of his bread and cheese, and seeing that no one gave him anything else, bowed his head and went on his way. And as he went, he turned to Don Quixote and said, "I pray you, sir knight-errant, if you meet me again, although you should see me being cut to pieces, do not come to my aid, but leave me to my ill fate, for it cannot be so great, but that greater will result from your help. And may you and all the knights-errant that ever were born in the world keep your paths away from mine." Don Quixote started up to chastise him, but he set off running so fast that no one tried to pursue him. The knight was greatly ashamed at Andrew's story, and the others had much ado not to laugh outright, and so put him to utter confusion. When they had finished their dinner, they saddled and went to horse once more, and travelled all that day and the next without any adventure of note, until they arrived at the inn, which was the dread and terror of Sancho Panza, and though he would rather not have entered it, yet he could not avoid doing so. The innkeeper, the hostess, her daughter, and Maritornes, seeing Don Quixote and Sancho return, went out to meet them with tokens of great love and joy. The knight returned their compliments with grave courtesy, and bade them prepare a better bed than they gave him the last time. "Sir," said the hostess, "if you would pay us better than the last time, we would give you one fit for a prince." Don Quixote answered that he would, and they prepared a reasonable good bed for him in the same room where he lay before. Then he went off to bed at once, because he was tired and weary, both in body and mind. He had scarcely locked himself in when the hostess ran at the barber, seizing him by the beard, and cried, "By my troth, but my tail shall no longer be used for a beard, for the comb which used to be kept in the tail gets tossed about the floor, and it is a shame." But the barber would not give it up for all her tugging, until the curate told him to let her have it, for there was no longer any need of a disguise, as the barber might now appear in his own shape, and tell Don Quixote that after he had been robbed by the galley slaves, he had fled for refuge to that inn. As for the princess's squire, if the knight should ask after him, they could say he had been sent on before to her kingdom to announce to her subjects that she was returning, bringing with her one who should give them all their freedom. On this the barber gave up the tail to the landlady, together with the other things they had borrowed. All the people of the inn were struck with Dorothea's beauty and the comeliness of the shepherd Cardenio. The curate made them get ready a dinner of the best the inn could produce, and the innkeeper, in hope of better payment, prepared them very speedily a good dinner. All this was done whilst Don Quixote slept, and they agreed not to wake him, for they thought it would do him more good to sleep than to eat.